Okay, a few more people might circle in, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good evening. I'm Susan Kreischer, Associate Director of Alumni Relations. Welcome to Why Quitting is Okay, How to Know When to Leave with Dave Phelan, Seamus Hanrahan, Rose Lynn, and Kyle Robertson. Before I turn things over to Dave, who will serve as our host tonight, I want to let you know that this session is being recorded. And I want to welcome several members of the Susquehanna faculty and staff who are joining us tonight, including Melissa Komora, Vice President for Advancement. Also from the advancement team are Chris Markle, Becky Toth, Logan Sweet, and Jody Swartz. And then also from the Career Development Center, we have Michaeline Schumann. Some of the students, for the students on the call, I want to let you know that we will get an attendee report. So if you are hoping to get credit for this attending the session tonight, rest assured we will be able to verify that from your faculty. Also, just let you know that there will be time for questions at the end of the session. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to you, Dave.
Thanks so much, Susan. And thank you everyone here who's joining this session. I'm excited to talk about quitting today. You know, especially with the panel here, I know it's a topic that doesn't get talked about a lot. Nowadays, entrepreneurs have been glorified and there's a lot of get rich quick rhetoric out there. And we want to normalize the conversation and talk about what it's really like to quit. We'll get into the good, the bad, and the ugly of it. So my name's Dave Phelan. I graduated in 2012. I was a business major at Susquehanna University. I started my business career working for an engineering company. 3 years in, I quit my full-time job and I started a mobile app startup with another fellow alum from Susquehanna, Philip DeMiro. While that startup didn't, turn out the way that we wanted it to, we took what we learned from that and started another company called Founders Approach, where we build apps and websites for startups and small businesses. We've now been doing that for the past 6 years and have released over 200 products for different companies throughout the US. And basically, over the past year, we started a new podcast called Why I Quit. And part of the reason for that was we wanted to, normalize the conversation and be able to tell people stories in terms of different reasons why people quit. Everyone quits for different reasons. Some people are looking to start a business. Other people are looking to change careers. Other people just want to travel or maybe spend more time with family. We want to inspire people that it's possible, but also be realistic about the hard parts of it as well. So today's three guests are going to share their story, experiences, and provide you feedback and things that they went through throughout their journey. So hopefully you can learn from them. So to start off, we are going to have each person intro themselves, talking about their graduating year, their major, and a little bit of context about their career path. And then we'll dive into the specifics of their story of quitting after that. And so Ashley Rose, if you don't mind kicking it off.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Dave. So my name's Ashley Rose. I graduated from Susquehanna University in 2017. Similar to Dave, I studied business. And after graduation, I went on to pursue a career in sales. Worked for a software company directly out of college and took a year to study yoga and teach yoga full time. And now working my way back into a full-time remote position, and really excited to normalize that conversation. I think what motivated me to participate is the concept of how what we're committed to changes based on what drives us, and to be really connected to what you want to learn more about in both your career path and then also personally. That should naturally drive, I think, the choices we make and what we commit to in a 9 to 5. And so excited to talk about that today. And thanks for hosting, Dave.
Perfect. So hi, everyone. I'm Kyle Robertson. So I graduated in 2011 with a double major in business and music. After graduation, I landed a job at JP Morgan in New York City, which, being a business student, I was super excited about. Obviously, JP Morgan is a great name, and I spent the last 11 years there. So it was a great place to start my career. When I entered the company, I went into a 2-year rotational program. So similar to, a lot of people coming out of business school. I then moved into a couple different roles across the risk and asset management area within the firm. I was lucky enough to spend the first 5 years in New York City, and then the last 6 years in London. And so it was, a great opportunity, really enjoyed my time there, but I have since moved on to become a post-grad student, so I'm a mature post-grad student, looking to pivot my career into strategy and sustainability. Just to echo what Ashley Rose said, looking forward to getting into what triggered that switch and where I have been since then.
Hi, my name is Seamus Hanrahan. I graduated in 2021 with a degree in finance. Immediately after graduating, I started working in finance as an operations specialist for a financial technology company outside of Philadelphia. And now I'm currently in the teacher intern program at Susquehanna working to get my teaching certificate. One of the main reasons I wanted to do this is because when I was going through my decision, it felt very isolating and like you're one of the only people that has that experience, but a lot more people than you realize are dealing with that. So I think it's important to talk about it.
That's perfect. Well, I'm excited to kick this off and actually get into, kind of the story of how you quit. And so a couple things I wanted to focus on for each person was there a specific moment that you had that kind of like, led to that? And when you first started thinking about quitting, how long of a process was it until you were actually, able to go through with it? If you can kick that off, Ashley Rose.
Yeah, definitely. So similar to what I mentioned in the intro, I think right out of college, something I craved was really intense corporate structure. I wanted to learn what it was like to work amongst a large organization. I started with Yelp, which I stayed with them for 4 years. And I wanted a boss that was really intense, that taught me not just the metrics we track in the sales profession, how we report on them, how we share that within a team and track individual goals. And so that was really important to me. And I think what drove my motivation to change was when that became less important to me, when tracking where I am against a stack rank of others within the organization became less of a focus and my focus has changed. That was really the deciding point for a change. And I think if we're in touch with what moves us, right, what excites us or what is a downer, that'll naturally let yourself know, okay, it's time for a change, right? What was once motivating me, what I once needed, I no longer need. So I stopped craving a boss that was really intense and micromanaging, which at the time served me. I loved it. And then I craved a little more flexibility, a little more space. I craved project-based work, less metric-based work. And the position and the company I was in originally is not the space to offer me that. And so understanding that dynamic drove my change. And yeah, I think naturally when you're passionate or you've put work in, you'll feel emotional possibly about the decision to leave. But I think just communicating that clearly. I shared with my boss, hey, that really motivated me when I started. I thank you for being a part of that. Here's some of what I loved. And now I'm interested in pursuing this. And he totally appreciated that. He also has since left Yelp and pursued something that motivated him. So that's when I started realizing I was ready for a change and how the conversation went for my first job.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. For me, having a bit longer of a runway, I feel like my length of time, it was a slow burn for a while. So I had always thought after graduating Susquehanna, potentially I'd go back to school, get an MBA or a master's in something. And kind of as the years went on, my mindset transferred away from the MBA just because I had had so much time in the business world. I thought if I'm going to take this time out of my life to go back to school, I want to go and be able to specialize into something. And so on and off throughout the years, I had looked at different programs. Nothing really spoke to me. And so this is kind of where the slow burn turned into a very fast burn over a couple months this past year. I found the program at the University of Edinburgh, run by the business school, but focused on strategy and sustainability. At the same time, in my job, I was starting to look at some ESG related, so environmental, government, and social issues. And I was seeing how some of the decisions were being made and who was being tasked to run some of those ESG related projects. And I saw that a lot of the leadership, no fault to their own, sustainability is new and evolving, but they didn't have a lot of knowledge. And so the decisions they were making were coming from a point of compliance, meeting regulations versus, hey, how can we make systemic change? How can we really become a sustainable organization? And so kind of, I found the program, I was seeing some things that I didn't love, at work or felt I could improve upon. And so that kind of culminated into this past summer, realizing that, what, I think it's time for a change. Time to go back, do something that I've been thinking about for a long time, meaning go back to school and, reposition my career and pivot my career.
For me, starting out, I was very goal focused. I'd set goals for myself, and I was kind of just working towards each one without looking at a broader picture of what my career was going to be. And I remember the exact moment that I kind of started to think about, hey, this isn't really what I want to do with my life right now. I'd just taken on some extra responsibility. And I was in a meeting with my boss, and he said, "You just made a great career choice." And in my head, I went, "This isn't what I want to do as a career, I think." So that started the wheels turning. And Ashley Rose said, when I approached my bosses about it, they said, "Whatever you need to do, like, is the right decision for you." My one boss said, "That's fine, as long as you give my son an A in math class, like, I'll be happy." But yeah, so I think just that moment was when it really started to turn. I started to realize that I kind of wanted some different, something different out of my career, something that maybe would make me feel a little bit differently about what I was doing each day.
No, that's perfect. And yeah, I definitely echo the sentiment. I think a lot of times that when people are looking to quit, most of the times people are most nervous about talking to their bosses or letting their coworkers down. Meanwhile, the majority of people I've talked to, the conversations go really well and most people are supportive of them. And so I'd love to segue that into just talking about like what was the hardest part of quitting. I know for me personally, it was actually talking to my boss. It took me like 3 times going into his office actually to get up the courage to actually do it. I'd be curious, for you all, like, was there a specific part of it that was the hardest part of the process?
Yeah, great question, Dave. I think maybe something we can all relate to in this panel and those that are attending is knowing and really tapping into why you want to quit, right? Making sure it's the right reason. I think ultimately when we bleed from one career into another, one commitment into another, we don't carve out time to really reflect and understand what's driving that, what's motivating me, what am I feeling right now that's making me consider and imagine a better path. Because if we just jump into the next one, it might not solve for what we're looking for. And so I think one thing that made me nervous at the time is what's driving this motivation. And, ultimately what I came to find is we're all going to make moves in this lifetime. It's just, when is your time to make that move, right? So if you really tap into your intuition, like you're knowing, and like deep down, I believe you always know what you need. You're going to know that more than anybody else. You'll know that more than your boss. And when my boyfriend and I were considering a move, we wanted to live in Florida. We craved a different lifestyle. We wanted sunshine. We wanted a home. We wanted 2 golden retrievers. And naturally, you're waiting on someone in HR to process a transfer. But what we found was we can't wait on such a big life move for someone that doesn't necessarily care about that for us, right? We care about that. Our lives and our choices have to come before someone's opinion at a company. And so when we started reframing it that way and reflecting on, okay, what motivates me? What drives me? What do I care about? What moves me? Then communicating that became easy, right? Sharing with my boss at the time, hey, this is where I'm trying to go. This is what fills me up. This is where I would love to stay in touch and maybe collaborate in the future. It became really positive, right? I stopped thinking of the word quitting. I started thinking of it as like respecting my choices, respecting my passions. And it actually helped me connect with other people. I think more people than we realize are changing, like commitments, focuses, families, jobs, and just being able to say, how did you know, right? How did you know when it was time? I think that's a question that could help us connect with each other versus, what do you do? So Dave, to your question, I think one of the hardest parts of quitting, right, or respecting my choice for change was really trying to understand why, like being able to articulate it. But what came before articulating that was understanding myself and knowing, why does this bore me now? What will motivate me next? And so I ended up moving into a 2-year yoga course and graduate program to just learn and experience and touch and feel and try new things. And that was probably the most exciting part, coming out of it and realizing it's all good and we're all going to make moves again. So what about you, Kyle?
Yeah, just to follow on from what you were saying around the why, I think that's super important. Kind of the circumstances around my specific quitting event snowballed into something that was pretty incredible. So it ended up being a very difficult choice between staying and going. I decided to tell my manager that I was, had applied to this program, was potentially leaving, when she told me that she was leaving. And she told me she was leaving 3 days after our other team member announced that he was leaving. So all of a sudden we had this vacuum on the team, and it was a 3-person team. And so when I received the offer to leave and go to uni, I had to have a conversation not only with my direct manager, my boss in London, but also our managing director back in New York. And when I went to give him the call to say that, look, I'm looking to pursue this opportunity, his response was, why don't you stay and lead the team? Now there are some finer details that are left out, like not necessarily getting a pay increase right now, not necessarily getting promotion right now, but you are going to get a lot of responsibility. You'll get to build out a team, so that's a fantastic opportunity. And, for those of you who've worked in the corporate world, like it's not often the path for you is cleared, especially not within the span of 3 days. And so, deciding between kind of staying and following on that corporate path versus leaving and going to university, I really had to reflect a lot on the why. What am I doing? Why am I doing this? Am I staying just because this is what I've done for 10 and 11 years? And that next step of getting that next promotion and building a team is what I'm supposed to do? Or should I leave and go do something that's new and interesting, and something that I could potentially, build a passionate career out of after getting the master's? So some of those conversations were definitely very difficult. They tried to be very persuasive to get me to stay, and I really had to come back to that why, to think, look, staying is not going to give me what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for right now is to learn something new, potentially pivot my career, get into a field that's growing and expanding, and staying and just getting additional management responsibilities isn't going to accomplish why I'm looking for something new right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree that the why is super important. Something that I dealt with when I was thinking about leaving was I had graduated college maybe 7 months before. So in my head, I was going back and forth. Am I feeling this way because I've just had a life change where I've moved on from a student to the real world per se? And is this just stress and anxiety about those sorts of things? Or is this a genuine career that I should move on from? And what really gave me some clarity to that was talking with the Career Development Center and Allie Grill as an alumni. And she really helped me to work through those thoughts and those sorts of feelings and everything to find out that, yes, I did want to move on from this career. And it wasn't just something that I was missing college or feeling torn about what I wanted to do with my life in general. It was the change in career.
No, that's great. And, the next thing I want to get into is really the, expectation versus reality of really that first year out, like right after quitting. I know some of us are in the midst of that right now, but, a lot of times people could go from not having a paycheck, or, it's figuring out health insurance, or it's figuring out not having a structure to your day and figuring out how to be self-motivated. Talk to me a little bit about kind of your expectation of what you thought post-quitting life would be like, and then the reality of what it was actually like.
Totally. So I think, everyone has different comfort levels. So some may leave a current career without one lined up. That is not my comfort level. So I think knowing what works for you based on what you've experienced previously or what you're curious about could drive that, right? So if you're craving time to travel or time to reflect, or you feel like I cannot think through what's next for me while I'm still here and I need a change, maybe that means you get really into fitness for a few weeks, or you start volunteering, or you travel, or you work really hard, you save, and you create space to reflect. So I think, Dave, to your point, on, that transitioning period. For me, I had lined up the grad school and yoga experience. And so I think what I expected in that was a 2-year part of my life that was really dedicated to learning and being out of my comfort zone. And that's totally what I got, having never taught a yoga class and also never really spent time meditating or teaching others physically, like how to move their bodies and work through breath work and work through not just like unpacking maybe some of what binds us. Like that was really heavy work, really intense work for a lot of people that sat in my class. And so I think sometimes we might line up, okay, I crave this. I'm going to take this on as the next adventure, hope this brings me XYZ, and it might bring you way more. And so I think feeling really open about that, right? Ultimately, we're craving something new, leaving a really long runway of what that could look like. And I think maybe a reason some of us feel uncomfortable using the word quitting, that could come from, how we're raised, that could come from athletics, that could come from others talking about it in a way where it seems negative. I think really tapping into where have commitments gone down really positively for you, right? So when I think about Susquehanna specifically, I played 2 Division III sports there, and under Coach Hoover, who's still the women's soccer coach, I had such a foundational and formative experience. So I think in seeing through that whole commitment, whether it was challenging or not, that was such a gift because it ended up helping me understand more about myself. So when it came time to make a transition, I didn't know what to expect. I kind of tapped back into what I learned during a tough period where I did stick it through, even if I had considered making a change at the time. And so when I was out of my comfort zone, trying new experiences in the yoga world, I kind of tapped into what I knew from college, which is what you said, Dave, about in your startup experiences, you pull from what you know, and that kind of helps you in times of uncertainty when you don't know what to expect in that new transition. So that was my experience. What about you, Kyle?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I've reflected on this and thought about this. I honestly don't think I had a whole lot of time to think about my expectations. So I applied to the program back in April, I guess it was, end of April. And things were quiet for a while. I then got waitlisted and I kind of thought, okay, applying to a top university, got waitlisted, makes sense. I've been out of school a long time, coming in as a, rather mature student. And then about a month later is when I had my acceptance. And to put this in context, I received the acceptance about a month later, but that was also a month before my wedding. So we had some other things going on at the time. And I didn't have a whole lot of time, I don't think, to process like, what are you really expecting to get out of this? Like, you applied for this program in April, you clearly found something, online, talking with a professor that was interesting, and you wanted to do it. And so at that point, when I got that acceptance, was so much other things going on in my life, learning, about what was happening at work as well with people leaving. I just kind of had to go with the gut reaction. And I think my expectation was, go learn something new and have that, be a pivot for your career. Now, in reality, I've not done the program yet, so we have another 6 months to go. So hopefully that happens in reality. I will say my time as a master's student, I would say getting a master's is very different than undergrad. Susquehanna was amazing, was great, and I absolutely loved my time there. And then here, it's a completely different experience. I'm now at a school that's much larger. Coming from the US, I had to learn a whole new system. So the UK education system is different as well. So I would say in reality, it's been great. I'm definitely learning a lot. I'm expanding my horizons, both in terms of, learning how to develop business strategy and also on the sustainability side. I would say I've been stretched in other ways maybe that I hadn't expected. Just, the diversity within the program. I mean, I had worked on extremely diverse teams at JP Morgan. Now you're working with people, not just culturally diverse, but age diverse as well. I mean, I'm the second oldest person in the program. So figuring out how to both share my experiences, but then also learn from folks who maybe don't have all of the work experience, career experience to be able to share back with me, but just their lived experiences from all over the world has stretched me in different ways. So I would say the reality so far is great. And I'm hoping that, after the next 6 months, it continues to go down the path that I was hoping it would.
Yeah, I would say when I first made the decision to quit, I kind of expected to be scared for a lot of it and a little bit of uncertainty. But once I realized what it was that I wanted to do, I kind of found a lot of drive and passion that I hadn't really had for parts of my previous career. And I found those again. And it made me really excited to get started in the program, and talking to professors and everything really helped to ignite that passion again, which I wasn't necessarily expecting. I knew that's what I wanted to do, but I was expecting to have those strong of feelings about getting back into something that I was going to be passionate about. And moving into the program, leaving was a little different because I knew exactly what I wanted to do when I left, and I knew my next steps. But there was still that sense of uncertainty about how it was going to go, and kind of questioning of, is this going to be the answer to what I'm looking for? Is this going to be the answer? And I don't think there was a definitive way to say that it was going to be. But now that I've started it and now that I'm doing it, I can say that it was a good decision and that I have found a lot of that stuff that I was missing.
No, that's great. And something that comes up all the time when people talk about quitting or wanting to quit is, really the work-life balance piece. I know we've gotten into the why before of kind of like why quitting, but I'd love to dive in a little bit more to thinking about work-life balance. I think with, the rise of smartphones, your work email is on your phone at all times, and it's extremely hard to turn off. Now with remote work, sometimes it's harder than ever to separate your work and your life. And so I'd love to kind of get into how do you all think about the priorities that you want in terms of like a work-life balance, as you start thinking about kind of your next roles and next positions?
Totally. Yeah. So what I think relates to that question is, even in the story I shared earlier around how, when we were thinking about moving and transitioning offices to the West Palm office out of the Jersey City office, and, you're naturally going to be waiting amongst like an HR transfer and boss approval and like an intra-office relocation. I think what we understood in that transition was like, ultimately, when you're promoted or when you're doing good work and assigned and handed new projects, or, the company is asking for you to travel for work, or, as Kyle expressed, like he's moved up in the ranks just through committing to that organization and following initiatives. And I think that's great, right? To be rewarded for good work, but ultimately that's not necessarily your choice, right? I mean, that's happening because of the work you're doing, because of your presence. But I think when it comes to work-life balance, it's a reflection of understanding what you need, right? So what do I need and what choices do I need to make to feel really fulfilled at the end of every day? And so if that is, okay, I want to be taking work home, I want to be working late night, I want to be in a study, books are all around, really tucked in, AirPods in, I want to be prepping on the weekends for presentations, that fills me up, that makes me feel really successful, then, I think that's part of the work-life balance you could look for. Yeah, naturally, we're all going to have, again, different comfort levels and different experiences that make us feel good on a weekly rhythm. For me, it was definitely around like, how can I get myself into like a lifestyle that I love? So how can I be going on runs during lunch outside? How can I walk our dogs after work? How can I teach yoga on the weekends? And I was also craving a remote lifestyle. So I wanted to be able to travel occasionally, but have a really nice home base, an office where I'm comfortable. And so because of those kind of criterias, it's slotted in a few different options of how to fill that up. And I think that's what's nice. Like you can fill up what you need in a lot of different ways. And my personal take on it is to try something. And so to put feelers out there and ultimately not make a decision until like offers are presented. So let's say you build a criteria of what kind of work-life balance you're craving and you're looking for. You apply yourself, you get references, you ask Susquehanna maybe for like career development support around what that position could look like. And then when offers present themselves, I think that's a good time to weigh it against your original criteria. Because sometimes when I think applying for new jobs and the craziness starts spinning, what you originally wanted might fade. I've definitely been there, but to bring that up front and center, weigh that up against the new position. Is this going to accomplish what I said was important to me? I think that's really critical. Otherwise, it might be a similar situation that you were in previously. What about you, Kyle?
Yeah, I can completely agree with that. I mean, especially that last piece, again, thinking about the why and what is it going to give you. Like when I had that opportunity to stay instead of leave and I was getting all this additional responsibility, the hours at a company like that are already long. Had been fine doing that, but this was going to extend it even more. And I had some conversations with my manager, talk through what her expectations were, what her experience was as she led the team for the past 5 or 6 years. And, it really made me think, is that where I want to be spending my time? If I'm going to go and spend, 14 hours a day doing something, do I want that to be at university, learning something new for the next year? Or do I want to spend the next year, learning to build out a team and do that in the context of the role that I was in? Now, potentially, if I had been in a different role, I would have been more interested in that. But in that team, kind of looking at where the MD was and his position as well, like that wasn't somewhere where I necessarily aspired to be. And so I don't think that I was really willing to give those hours to work under those circumstances. Overall, in terms of work-life balance, I think COVID completely changed kind of my thought process around that. Prior to COVID, JP Morgan was not a work from home company at all. It could be difficult if you had a plumber stopping by to stay home, like it really was difficult. And then all of a sudden, it was work from home the whole time. And then the transition back to the office, has been slow and interesting. And so I would say, I was one of the people, I was happy to go back to the office. I like to be there a few days a week. I like to get out of my home, go someplace where you have the water cooler talk and that type of office culture. But having the 2 or 3 days at home on the flip side was also really appreciated. So I would say when I get back into the workforce, I would be looking for someplace that you can have that type of in and out balance from an office. Also, I find the travel piece, Ashley Rose, that you mentioned, like interesting in terms of traveling for work. I had never done that the past 11 years, traveled a lot personally, but through the job, I was always desk bound. And that's also something that I've been interested in pursuing in the future. Now, I could do it and I could find that, I don't like it. It's not all it's cracked up to be. But definitely, again, thinking about that, do you want to be behind a desk all day? Do you want to be out traveling? Because that can lead to, what brings you energy. I love to travel. I love airplanes. I love all of that. So even if I'm, working and traveling for work, I think I would still find enjoyment out of the travel itself. Versus I know for other people, they hate flying, they hate that whole process. And so, that would probably detract from the work-life balance.
Definitely agree.
So on the note of work-life balance and working from home, I was predominantly working from home at that point. But what I found was that it was a little difficult working from home to distinguish between work and home, which is where that work-life balance kind of came into conflict and had some effects on mental health, because it was hard to turn off the computer and then just turn around and walk over to the couch and relax and turn everything off. It was hard to do that and separate work from home when you are working from home. And that's where the stress of it came into effect for me, was that I was thinking about it for hours after I was done for the day at work. I was thinking about what tomorrow was going to be. And that separation just became difficult, and something that I definitely was looking for a change in my career, which is why I'm excited going into teaching, to be going into a classroom every day and having that face-to-face interaction with people, because that's something that I know now that I really need in a career, is to have that interaction.
No, that's great. And, Kyle, going back to your point too, I think there's like a difference between, traveling for work and then like traveling and working remotely. In my first job, I used to travel for work a bunch and honestly didn't like it. It was like in a hotel room by yourself, on the road. But, this past year I worked remote from Costa Rica for a month, and I got the same work done that I did there, but I was able to, be in a different place. And I think, remote work is opening up so many different opportunities. And I think part of it is also understanding like what you want out of your office life. Because at the same time, there are definitely times where I'm super isolated working from home because it's, just me behind a computer screen for, 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And so I think a lot of times for people that are thinking about like, if they want to change, part of it is thinking about like, do you actually not like not having the interaction in the office, or is it that you want part of it? And so I definitely think, people should think critically about like, what type of office work that they want kind of like heading into their career. Perfect. And then the next piece is just kind of for people out there that are, kind of following a similar path. What would you say is the best piece of advice you were given, or what is a piece of advice you would give someone who is, kind of contemplating a change?
Yeah, I think first thing is hell yeah, do it. There's a reason you're contemplating it. That means deep down, it's time. And I think there are going to be times in our life that will drive changes. Maybe some of us go on and become parents. And as a parent, you might need a different setup. Maybe some of us end up wanting to care for a family member. That might drive a location change. But then there's going to be a lot of times in our life where we just crave a change. I think the biggest advice I got was from a professor in graduate school. And they said, listen, if like God willing, and if you're lucky, you'll have 5 decades of career, right? You'll have 5 decades of career. And so if you spend the first decade, a couple years in one industry, a couple years learning, a couple years trying, that can shape what the next 4 decades look like. It's a long haul. And so using the first decade of career to maybe explore, understand, communicate your interest, and then taking that into your next decade and really understanding how you can share that. And so we had that question from a participant. Thank you for asking. And I had just chatted back how I felt the answer is, which really ultimately is the more you can communicate the truth, the better you'll find the next fit, right? So if I can say to my current employer, which I did, this is what I'm craving. I, different than Dave, love a good week traveling solo. I love being able to kind of be alone for the week and work long days in a new state I've never been, meet with clients, and then come back to the hotel room, totally decompress. And so I think the more in your experience of what you like, what you don't, the more you can share that in a professional way with the next career. Like, hey, this is what I'm looking for. What are you looking for in a new hire? And let's make that a really transparent conversation. And I literally said that. And I think that's what's healthy. And so the best piece of advice I was given was, God willing, we'll have 5 decades of career. You have time to try. That's one of the hardest things in life, I think, is finding a career that's really aligned with your interests and complements your strengths and also challenges your weaknesses. And so if you're at a time in your life where you want to complement your strengths, put yourself in situations where you can lean on them, great, go find that. If you're at a time in your life where you're like, I need to work on these weaknesses, maybe that's, patience or emotional regulation or assertiveness, put yourself in a position where you can work on those weaknesses. I think it is so individual. That's why I think comparing ourselves to others is really toxic. What you need at different times changes. So if you want to work on your weaknesses, use this next 5 years to do that, right? And then hopefully you'll have another 4 decades to kind of tweak it. So I guess that I stole that and made that 2 answers, but I got 2 really good pieces of advice. So those are mine. What about you, Kyle?
Yeah, I like that. As somebody who completely overanalyzes everything, that, oh, hell yeah, just go get it is pretty difficult for me. So I would say, something that somebody had recommended to me was the simple pro-con list, which I know it sounds incredibly simple. And to be 100% honest, when I did it, didn't necessarily help me that much, but I was probably overanalyzing the pro-con list unto itself. But it can help at least narrow down the scope of what you're thinking about. Like, try to find some trends or patterns in what you have there on the pro side or the con side of the decision, and try to use that as a springboard to think about why you really want to make this decision. In terms of handling conversations, it was very delicate, especially when a managing director is saying, hi, please stay and we'll give you a team to say, no, thank you. But really, again, it all comes back to the why. The answer to him was, I really appreciate it. I understand it's a fantastic opportunity. I've worked with this company for 11 years. So I understand how things work and I understand this is super unique, but this opportunity isn't giving me what I'm looking for right now. So really bringing it all back to the why is important. I would say with peers and colleagues, it was a little bit of a joke because everybody was like, oh my gosh, the whole team has just left. So, those conversations were a bit lighter. But yeah, especially when you're turning something down, to go off and explore and do this, you just need to be firm with yourself to say, you know what, this is the right decision. Even if it doesn't, to our conversation about expectation and reality, even if it doesn't turn out, in reality to be what I expected, you're at least learning something new. You're at least seeing something different. You're getting a different experience. Having come out of Susquehanna and then worked for the same firm for 11 years, I think I'm a little bit unique in our generation. And so it had always been in the back of my head, like, you need to go out, not necessarily get a master's, but go to a different company, do something different. And so the fact that this gave me kind of the spark and ignited something to get out and see something new, I do think that's important. So yeah, best piece of advice, I guess I don't really have a particular piece of advice because it was a very difficult decision for me to make. But I do honestly find the pro-con list can help, again, at least focus your train of thought.
Ashley, I think something you said was part of the best piece of advice that I got, and that was how comparing yourself to other people can be really harmful. The best piece of advice that I got was not everyone's going to take the same path to success, whatever they deem success to be. And I think that through social media, through LinkedIn, those sorts of things, for me at least, sometimes it was hard to see my peers being successful in their careers and being happy in their careers when I didn't feel that in mine. That was something tough to experience. So that advice about how not everyone's going to take the same path really helped me to realize that there's definitely still time. Like you said, 50-year careers, there's always still time to still figure it out. And it's not going to look the same for everybody, but it's possible for everybody.
No, that's great advice. And the other thing that I always, talk to people about is, being willing to reverse engineer the type of life that you want. We were talking about how like work and life kind of blends together. And so, if for some people money is most important, other people, flexibility is most important, other people work from home, but like all of those are going to be a sliding scale. Everyone's going to want different parts of different things. And so it's like reverse engineering, like, okay, how much money do I need to make to live the lifestyle I want to have with the budget that I have? Do I want to work remote or work part-time? Where do I want to live? And I think you prioritize all of those different things, and then that can kind of help make your decision, because I think if you try to just base it off of one thing, a lot of times it's not black and white. There's 50 shades, and you need to think about like all the different aspects and how to prioritize that to make the decision. So I definitely, one of those things where it's like, you got to think through it. But then at the end of the day, like Ashley Rose said, sometimes you just got to go for it, because I think sometimes people, wait too long because they're, too nervous to make the leap. So kind of heading into the next piece, we actually got a couple of questions beforehand. And two of them were actually tied to people asking about quitting and changing jobs, and if there's a time that's like too early to quit for your resume, or if you change jobs too much, if that like looks bad. So I'd love to kind of poll the panel and kind of see what everyone thinks in terms of the effect of how it looks on your resume when you're quitting a job or jumping between jobs.
Yeah, definitely. I think it would look bad if, when asked, why did you change, it's like we kind of fumble over the answer. I think if you were diligent before the change of knowing what you wanted, what motivated you, I think that's really easy to communicate. I think trying to craft fun and intelligent responses that are going to be received well is tough, right? Because we have no idea what that receiver is going to relate to. We have no idea how our tone might be that day. So I always try to lean on the side of just sharing my truth. And if I'm really tapped into what drove that change, feeling free to communicate that. I think at times you can answer and not elaborate. Like, I don't think you have to elaborate and explain yourself to other people, but if it's someone you're interviewing that's asking you specifically, talk to me about the careers that you've had out of college. Great. Thanks so much for asking. In this first job right out of college, I learned XYZ that fed into a 2-year graduate program where I focused on XYZ. And now I'm in a remote position so I can focus on working on XYZ. Right. And you can just keep it really cut and dry. I think, in general, how you genuinely feel about something is going to shine far above what words you use. So if you feel really good about the choices you've made and the career moves you made, that interviewer is going to feel that from you, right? And it's always nice if you have a few references. Even if I leave a position, I always say, assuming you leave on good terms, like, hey, I'm putting a notice, what kind of projects can you hand off to me? I'm happy to work and train the replacement. Great. And then with a couple of days left, hey, if I write a template, would you be willing to sign an undated letter of recommendation? So like no date, their information. I got this new position and I submitted the application with that letter that talked about these key parts of myself that I wanted to show up more in a new position with, right? Like I wasn't tapping into, say, these sides of myself that I really want to. And so the letter of recommendation talks about those sides. My interview talks about those sides, because let's say you're doing a really calculative position and it's behind the desk crunching numbers. Maybe you don't want to tap into that side of yourself. You want to be in the really hands-on, rotational kind of side of you that's down to try new projects. You want everything to talk about that. And so I think, to Dave's question, when asked, why have you switched? Hopefully there's a reason and a method to that. But I also, not to be intense, but like, I think we all have gifts, and like, we don't want to die having kept all our gifts inside. We want to spill that out. And so to share that with somebody like, hey, I was really motivated in sharing this side of myself. This was a position where I felt I could do that. Turned out I couldn't, right? I'm hoping I can do that here. Do you see a possibility for this kind of contribution? And they're going to tell you, yeah, we want more of that, or nah, we're not really looking for that. Thank you so much for sharing. The more open we are, the better fit you'll find and I'll find. And I think that's like what integrity means, being really integrated, like the same person you are outside of work, showing up inside of work. And so knowing why you're making the change, communicating that from the heart. I mean, it depends like what your style is. If you don't like to communicate that, then totally don't take this advice I'm giving. But that's the side I took, and I feel really myself at work now. How about you, Kyle?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a whole lot to add to that. I think those are all really good points. I think the only thing I would say is, for time in the role, as long as you're able to, as Ashley Rose said, explain yourself, why you moved from here to there, I think it's perfectly fine. The only issue I would see is if it becomes a pattern. So if it's literally every year, or, at that point, even if you can explain yourself, it's going to raise some red flags like, okay, this person was just following their heart. They wanted to do this last year, and now the flavor of the week is this. Now the flavor of the week is this. And so obviously, I think at some point that would start to raise red flags for a recruiting manager. But doing it once or twice in the span of a few years, no, I think especially in this day and age with the younger generations and folks wanting to try something new, especially now since COVID and the work-life balance conversation and Great Resignation, all of that, like people are wanting to get out there and experience new things. So I think it's becoming more normative to have less time in a role and kind of switch around and see where your interests lie. But yeah, I would just be careful on the pattern bit. Definitely be able to explain why you made a conscious decision to change, but then also recognize that if you're doing it every week, that's not going to be too good.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything that they've said. That why is definitely important to know going into the interviews or who you're going to be talking to. And Kyle, as you said, with speaking from a younger perspective, most of my friends that have graduated around the same time as me are not on the first job they started after college. And a lot of them have really found success and growth in that second job, not necessarily a career change totally, but moving on, they found that growth and success. So I do think that it's okay to do that as long as you have that why backing you.
Yeah, and I also think it's been blown out of proportion a little bit in terms of like how it will look so bad in terms of like on the resume or in the interview. I think like the other thing to remember is that like we're getting to a point that a lot of mid-level managers are now our generation, and it's becoming more expected that people are moving between places. And so I think if it shouldn't be a reason not to, but I definitely agree with Kyle, like if it's a pattern, obviously you got to be able to tell the story of why. But yeah, I know we got another question that was tied to, in the process of quitting, did you establish a backup plan? I think it's a good question. I think, one thing that, we always talk to people about is that, you also don't have to quit, full time to quit your job. I know, on our podcast, we had actually a Susquehanna alum that, found out their company, she was able to move to part-time and work 2 days a week, stay on her health insurance, and then she started a business on the side. When I quit my job to start, my startup, I was also driving Uber on the side just to make extra money to be able to pay the bills. And so I think there's a lot of different ways to go about it. It doesn't have to be like always going to $0 from there. So I'd be curious what everyone on the panel thinks about that question as well.
Yeah, and even I feel like more specifically, Dave, is there a part of that you're hoping could advise new students on? I'd be curious, like other directions you could see that question going in.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall there is, there's not one way to skin a cat, right? I think there is, so many options out there in terms of like part-time positions, and also there's, so many hours outside of the 40-hour work week. I know like 9 to 5 obviously dominates most of the day, but I do think that there's also this other side of it that is you have nights and weekends. And if there's something you're super passionate about and that's what you want to go for, and that's what you want to quit your job, validate that, before quitting your job, that that's actually what you want to do and you can make money doing it. So, we talk with a lot of startups regularly where, someone, quits their job and their salary goes to $0, but then they only have a shorter runway of how long they can last on $0 to test out if they could make that startup work. Where the people that we find a lot of times are more successful are like, okay, I'm going to, stay in my job, work nights and weekends, get to a point where I'm making enough money from this side business that I can go full time and all in with it. And I think, you can kind of extrapolate that outside of just starting a business, but you can also have that as well with, maybe you are looking for, a career change, actually, for example, with yoga, right? Instead of going full time into yoga teaching right away and quitting your job, you can do it on weekends. And if it's something that you like enough and then you want to do that full time, you can eventually move into that. So I think, there's also an aspect of like, where you can part-time quit or, kind of like test things out on the side and then, be ready to jump on an opportunity when that arises from there.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. I really agree with what Kyle said in the last round of answers, or around how, you want to be intentional and conscious about the choices, not just so it makes sense on your resume, but also so I think it like blends really nicely in your life and like the rhythm of your life. And I think also sometimes positions will open themselves up. Like the first 4 years at Yelp, each year was really different. And so someone asked a question in the chat about, when it's time to leave. I also think maybe it's okay to stay, but you need a new position at that company, right? You want to take on a new project at that company, but I think it all goes to what you need. And so to your point on how can you try new things, I think it's cool if you're already on this conversation and you're here tonight. I imagine there's something you're curious about, I'm imagining a new way. I see myself in a new environment. Maybe an easy start would be communicating to your boss, hey, I saw this posted on the internal job board. It motivates me. I'm going to apply. I'd love your support. You can also ask, I think it depends on the environment where you work, but I think it also shows your commitment to change when you're not asking someone else for permission to try something new for yourself, right? I mean, it's our lives, and ultimately we got to take control of that as best we can. And so to communicate, hey, this motivates me. This is the direction I'm hoping to go. Here's how I'm looking for a solution. I'd love to do it within the organization. Can you support me in applying internally? And so I think that'd be a great way to try it with less risk. And I think, yeah, some passion projects are meant to stay passion projects. personally knew like a yoga graduate school 2 years period of my life was a better combo than just yoga full-time. Just because I like more on my days physically, like I like a day filled from say 9-ish to 5-ish. But yeah, I would definitely encourage, if you can try things on the side, like you're curious, let's say you're curious about coaching, go volunteer for like a local team that practices in the evenings or on the weekends. Like if you're curious about management, like maybe doing like a kind of management give for a volunteer organization where there's 40 volunteers that aren't committed financially to the work, and you're motivating them and dragging influence from different parts of yourself, right? Because you can't really influence from authority in a volunteer position. You have to influence through like reciprocity, or you have to influence through likability. And so I think trying new areas about what the theme is you're curious about in a less like high stress environment could be great, because then you'll see, actually, nope, I don't want to work on that. I'm not going in that direction. So yeah, I think if you can do that, that'd be great. How about you, Kyle?
Yeah, I would just add on the changing roles within the company. So I know I spent 11 years at JP Morgan, but I did have 4 different roles during that time. And I definitely feel, I mean, I got to learn a lot, see a lot of different things, obviously move geographies as well. So it was a lot of fantastic experiences, but it's all in a safer environment, because over the first couple of years, I built a reputation, and then you just continue to build on that. So it's not like I was changing firms where I had to reinvent myself, 4 times. It's you continue to operate in an environment where you know who to call, you know how to work the phone book, you know how to work, so on and so forth. So you're in a comfortable environment while you're getting to learn new things. So that's one piece. Just the other piece I would add, if you're looking for a backup plan, or if you're trying to figure out if you should leave or not, if you can take some courses on the side, or Coursera or EDX online, or 2 online, course platforms that, if you're interested in sustainability, or you think you're interested in sustainability, you can go on there, take 1 course, see, okay, this is interesting, and then kind of progress that way instead of cutting it cold turkey. I had been lucky enough that I was doing some work on sustainability. That's what whet my appetite. I knew that was something I wanted to get into, and I knew, taking the time to do a full-time master's would hopefully be beneficial. And there are, obviously you can go to grad school part-time. There's also, depending how long you've been in the workforce, there's executive education as well. So I know within the sustainability sphere, there's a couple like 1-year programs where you have to go to a campus for like 2 weeks out of the year, and then the rest of it's online. There's kind of hybrid things like that for folks who are more senior. So there's a lot of opportunity out there, I think, to kind of figure out what you're interested in, what your appetite, and then go from there.
I agree. I don't have anything to add.
Well, that's perfect. I know we're wrapping up. I think we only have about 1 minute left, but yeah, I mean, I think overall, I think another important thing is just talk to people about it. I think pre-commitment is one of the biggest parts of actually being able to, go through with the change. And so talk to your friends, talk to your family, but also don't be afraid to reach out to, mentors, other SU alumni. I know for me personally, I'm on LinkedIn, Dave Phelan. Anyone can always reach out to me if you have any questions, ever want to talk through anything. So that from my side, you can always connect with me. And then anyone else here have any parting words before we leave?
I think in the interim, maybe just grab a journal and start journaling at work, like what's moving you. Even if you're angry or you're enthusiastic or you're fulfilled, like write what moves you in this time as you're considering, and maybe let this just be a really good start to reflecting, and let the choices kind of present themselves.
I just say the one thing that helped me kind of decide that I wanted to move was looking at job titles of jobs that I could get with the new knowledge. And so I just went on, LinkedIn, Indeed, Google, whatever, and typed in, sustainability manager or sustainable strategy, and saw what came up. And when I was reading those job descriptions and I was getting excited, I knew that this was somewhere where I wanted to go and somewhere where I needed to expand my knowledge, because not only do you get the job description, which will explain kind of what your day-to-day, or kind of explain what your day-to-day will be like in that new role, but you also get what they're looking for. And so when I was seeing the types of knowledge bases they were looking for to fill the position, I knew I had a gap and I knew I needed to do something about that. So it wasn't just taking a couple of free courses online, it was kind of radically changing the knowledge base that I had to get into that field.
I think what Ashley Rose said earlier about how we're in control of our own lives is really important. And it's important to recognize that you're not trapped in whatever it is that you're doing and change is possible.
I think that's a perfect way to wrap it up, and definitely appreciate everyone's time here. Thanks everyone who attended this. Thank you, Susan, for setting this up. And yeah, I really appreciate everyone's time. Thanks, everybody.